Addie opened her eyes and tried to make sense of where she was. She was warm, snug, and dry. There was a pebble digging into her hip, but otherwise she was comfortable. Yulin was holding her as he slept, one arm and hand along her back. Her eyes glanced up at his face, at the peaceful strength in his features, even with the long scar that arched from the outer edge of his right eyebrow down to the corner of his mouth. For a second, she wanted to kiss the lips mere inches away from hers, but she decided against it. He needed the restorative power of sleep more than she did. Behind her the fire crackled and hissed as a log split and fell into the coals. She shifted lazily and looked one last time up at her husband's face. It was the tiniest of movements up in the trees, a shadow on a shadow, not a trick of firelight, nor was it any kind of movement made by a limb or the rustling of the yellowing leaves. There, about 20 or so yards away, where she could make it out just above where a lock of his golden-red hair had fallen over his ear. Addie lowered her lashes, feigning sleep, and waited, just to make certain. She began to count Yulin's slow heartbeats. On the 33rd beat, she saw the movement again. Without realizing it, her whole body tensed, and she caught her breath. The heartbeat sped up. "What?" he whispered so softly she could barely hear it. Addie dropped her eyes to find his staring directly at her. "What?" he repeated, his body tensing. She replied by rolling her eyes up to the spot behind him. "Bloods." He pulled her closer until their lips nearly touched. "Where's your sword?" she murmured. "At my back, with my dagger." "Dagger's no good. I need to get to my bow, but if it sees me, it'll know." "The men?" "Unaware. It came through the treetops." "Just one?" Addie could feel his other hand flex its fingers where it lay between their bodies. Both of hers had been curled at chest level. "Follow my lead," she whispered, her mouth teasing his. Before he could reply, she started to roll over, like a sleeping form adjusting to a more comfortable position. With her buttocks against his groin, Yulin stifled a moan at the contact and tried to ignore the fantasies that reared up with the feeling of her shifting hips. Her weapon was between them and the fire. Using the blanket to cover her movements, Addie slowly, very slowly, reached over until she grasped the longbow and a single arrow, drawing it an inch at a time from the quiver so she wouldn't alert the blood. Right now, Yulin's body was shielding most of what she was doing from the creature. A few feet away, a guard noticed she was awake and flashed her a smile, and froze when he understood what she was doing. His face paled, but otherwise he made no sound or sudden gesture. A glance at the battle lord found the man's eyes drilling into his before cutting back to watch his wife. Once she had the arrow knocked, Addie arched her back, whispering, "On 3, jerk back the blanket and lie on your back as flat as you can." His hand against her stomach withdrew to clutch the thick quilt. 1. The creature hadn't moved. Her ears strained to listen for any further movement, but there was none. 2. She prayed for a clear shot. Well, there was just one way she knew she would get one, and that would be to draw its attention. 3! She yelled. Yulin threw back the quilt as he simultaneously rolled onto his back and flattened himself against the ground. The longbow and arrow arched up and over as Addie rolled with it until she was facing the opposite direction, leaning over his chest and aiming the weapon horizontally. "Hey, you! Monkey face!" A split second later, the arrow went buzzing through the air. The blood screeched as the barb found the tender flesh of its lower abdomen, and the creature dropped from the tree to land less than 5 feet away from a stunned guard.